It was supposed to be the most magical night of the year. Christmas at the royal family's estate, a time for tradition, warmth, and the kind of glittering spectacle that fills magazines, social media feeds, and living rooms across the globe. But in 2025, that magical night became the scene of a confrontation that would shock the world. A family feud played out in front of cameras, courtiers, and history itself. The question that lingers is almost unthinkable. What happens when one of the most famous brothers in modern history shows up uninvited to a royal Christmas, and his own brother, expected to be the picture of composure, takes decisive action to stop him from stepping further inside? Imagine the scene for a moment. Snow falling gently on the estate grounds, the golden lights of the palace reflecting off frost-covered windows, and inside, the air thick with expectation. The table is laid with crystal and china. The scents of roasted meats and mulled wine permeate every room, and every detail has been meticulously planned. The world sees it as a symbol of tradition, of harmony, of family. But behind closed doors, tension has been brewing for months, years even, and no one anticipated the storm that was about to hit that Christmas morning. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might be wondering, why now? Why does this story matter more than any royal holiday scandal in recent memory? The answer is simple. Because this isn't just about a brother being told he can't stay for dinner. This is about power, reputation, history, and the careful choreography of a monarchy that has spent centuries managing perception. Every move, every word, every glance is under scrutiny. And in 2025, when Prince Harry appeared at the palace uninvited, all of that scrutiny focused squarely on his brother, Prince William. But before we get to that shocking moment, let's rewind. Because to understand the magnitude of what happened, you have to understand the context. The cracks that had been forming in the royal family for years, the unspoken grievances, the moments of tension that were invisible to the public eye but devastatingly real behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace and Sandringham. For decades, the world has watched the relationship between these two brothers unfold. From their boyhood adventures in the gardens of Kensington Palace to the public appearances that cemented their images as the future of the monarchy, there has always been an unspoken bond. Yet, as they grew older, that bond became more complicated. Differing visions, contrasting personalities, and the weight of public expectation created fault lines that no one dared to acknowledge openly, until now. The tension between William and Harry is not new, but the events of Christmas 2025 brought it into stark relief. Unlike the private disputes of years past, this confrontation was unavoidable, visible, and inevitable. And it wasn't just the brothers who felt the strain. Kate Middleton, often praised for her composure and grace, found herself navigating an emotional minefield. Senior palace aides, who have spent lifetimes managing the optics of the monarchy, were caught between loyalty and protocol, unsure whether to intervene or observe. The staff, ever loyal but increasingly anxious, watched in silent dread as history prepared to unfold in front of them. What makes this night so captivating and terrifying is the collision of personal and public life. Because in the royal family, there is no true separation. Every smile is scrutinized, every glance analyzed, every disagreement has the potential to explode onto the global stage. And when Harry arrived, unannounced, he didn't just walk into a room. He walked into the eye of a storm that had been quietly gathering for years. Insiders have since described the moment in chilling detail. The initial sight of Harry at the entrance, casually holding a coat in one hand, a hint of mischief, or was it defiance, in his eyes, froze the room. Staffers who were present report an immediate shift in energy, the kind that is almost palpable, the kind that makes you realize that history is about to be made, and you are standing right in the middle of it. William, whose composure is legendary, did not move immediately. He paused, measured, calculating. Every gesture, every micro-expression was telling. And in that silence, the tension was louder than any words could be. Why did Harry come uninvited? Was it a simple desire to reconnect, to be part of a family celebration, or was it something more calculated? Rumors abound, whispers of personal grievances, long-standing resentments, and subtle provocations that had been simmering for years. Some suggest that Harry was testing boundaries, seeing if the family would bend for him. Others claim he simply wanted to enjoy Christmas with his family, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the strict rules and expectations that govern royal life. Whatever the truth, his presence forced a reckoning that no one was prepared for. And this isn't just a story about sibling rivalry. This is a story about duty, tradition, and the unbearable weight of expectation. For William, this was more than a brother showing up uninvited. It was a test of leadership, an opportunity to assert authority while balancing empathy. For Harry, it was about agency, identity, and the struggle between family obligation and personal freedom. And for the world watching, it was a rare glimpse behind the velvet curtains, an unfiltered view of the human drama that lies at the heart of a centuries-old institution. As the room held its breath, conversations in whispers, eyes darting between the two brothers, one thing was clear: something had to give. And when William finally made his move, it was decisive, immediate, and shocking. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we reveal exactly what happened, it's crucial to understand the layers of history, emotion, and expectation that made this moment so explosive. Because the story of Christmas 2025 doesn't begin at the door of the palace. It begins years earlier, in the subtle interactions and unspoken tensions that built up over time. Small slights, misunderstood intentions, and the relentless glare of public scrutiny all combined to create a powder keg. And on that cold December day, with snow dusting the palace grounds and a family gathering in the grand halls, the fuse was finally lit. So what happened when Harry actually stepped into the room? How did William respond? How did Kate, the staff, and other family members navigate a situation that had the potential to spiral out of control in minutes? These are the questions that everyone is asking, and the answers are more surprising and more dramatic than most could imagine. But even before we dive into the confrontation itself, consider this: the world is watching. Every gesture, every word, every action is recorded, analyzed, and dissected. In the age of instant news and social media scrutiny, there is no privacy, no escape from interpretation, no ability to retreat unnoticed. And in that environment, family dynamics become public spectacle, a drama played out on the global stage with consequences far beyond the palace walls. By the end of this story, you'll understand why Christmas 2025 will be remembered not as a season of joy, but as a turning point in the modern monarchy. You'll see the human side of royal life, the tension, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and how a single uninvited guest changed the course of a historic celebration forever. And yet, despite all the speculation, all the insider accounts, and all the public outrage, one question remains: did anyone really see it coming? The moment William made his decision, the silence was deafening. Eyes widened, staff froze, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though time itself had stopped. It all started, as most things do in royal life, with the illusion of calm. Outside the palace, the winter morning was serene. Frost kissed the perfectly manicured lawns, and the first hints of sunlight glimmered on the gilded gates. A perfect postcard scene, exactly what the public expected from the British royal family. But as anyone who has ever been inside a palace, or studied the delicate choreography of high society, knows, calm is rarely what it seems. Beneath the sparkling surfaces, tension had been building, layer upon layer, like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The Christmas of 2025 was supposed to be traditional, familiar, and joyous. Invitations had been sent, menus meticulously planned, and carols rehearsed to perfection. William had spent weeks coordinating every detail with his wife, Kate, ensuring that every moment reflected the elegance and decorum expected of the monarchy. From the crown-shaped napkin folds to the timing of each course, nothing was left to chance. And yet, even in this controlled environment, no one could predict how fragile this particular evening would become. In the hours before the celebration, staff scurried quietly through the corridors, balancing silver trays, adjusting floral arrangements, and rehearsing final ceremonial cues. There was a careful rhythm to their movements, a silent recognition that any disruption could ripple across the evening. Some whispered among themselves about family tensions, subtle hints they had picked up over months of observing the household. After all, insiders knew, the brothers had never been close in recent years. Their interactions, once easy and playful, had become increasingly formal, punctuated with polite smiles and measured words. Kate, ever the diplomat, moved through the preparations with calm efficiency. She checked with the chef on the roast, glanced at the linens, and nodded approvingly at the placement of each ornament. But behind her composed exterior, there was a tension she could not disguise. She knew that William, while unflappable in public, carried the weight of responsibility in private. This wasn't merely about hosting a festive dinner. It was about maintaining the unity of a family under the world's gaze. Every decision carried consequence, and this year, those consequences would be extraordinary. Even the youngest members of the household sensed the undercurrents. Children played in the grand halls, laughing and chasing one another, yet there were moments when they froze mid-step, noticing a subtle exchange between William and Harry in past gatherings. It was an unspoken tension, one that the staff had grown adept at navigating, but that the public would never understand. A simple glance could hold a world of meaning, a warning, a challenge, or an accusation, yet to outsiders, it appeared merely polite. So as the final preparations were completed, the palace seemed calm. On the surface, everything reflected the grandeur and warmth expected of a royal Christmas. The fire blazed in the grand hall, ornaments sparkled with a soft golden glow, and the scent of roasting chestnuts mingled with fresh pine. Outside, snow continued to fall gently, framing the palace like a scene from a classic Christmas card. To the world, this was perfection. But perfection, in this case, was fragile. Behind the closed doors, conversations were cautious, polite, and layered with subtext. William and Kate had their private moments, checking on arrangements, discussing last-minute adjustments, and exchanging brief smiles that masked more complicated emotions. William was aware, more than anyone, that the night could go either way. He understood the stakes. A single misstep, an unexpected guest, or a poorly chosen word could ignite tensions that would dominate headlines for months. And he knew that the one person most likely to test those boundaries had a history of doing exactly that. Prince Harry, in the weeks leading up to Christmas, had hinted at plans that were vague at best. No official invitation had been extended, yet murmurs suggested he might appear anyway. Some aides speculated that he simply wished to surprise his family, to bridge the growing distance that had defined the past several years. Others feared that his presence could be a deliberate challenge, a test of the family's tolerance and control. There were even whispers that Meghan might be involved in advising Harry on his approach, a subtle influence shaping every word and gesture. But for now, there was only speculation. The calm before the storm also extended to the media and public perception. Journalists had long been attuned to the undercurrents in the royal family, trained to spot tensions, subtle hints, and leaked stories. Social media analysts were already predicting potential controversies, while fans speculated endlessly about how this year's celebration would unfold. Yet, despite all the preparation and scrutiny, no one could have predicted the exact moment that would alter the course of the evening. In this carefully controlled environment, even the smallest deviation would be magnified. A misplaced word, a glance that lingered too long, a reaction too sharp or too delayed. Any of these could become headline news. And for the brothers, every moment carried the weight of history. They were no longer just siblings. They were public figures, heirs to a monarchy that demanded perfection in both private and public life. As the minutes ticked closer to the arrival of the family and guests, William's mind was a mixture of strategy and anticipation. He considered every possible scenario, from a smooth, uneventful evening to the worst-case scenario of a confrontation in front of staff and family. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, aware that the night's unfolding would either cement traditions or shatter them completely. Kate, meanwhile, tried to maintain an air of calm for everyone else. She reassured staff, offered gentle smiles to the children, and moved through the rooms with quiet determination. But even she could not escape the underlying tension. She understood that no amount of preparation could fully insulate the family from the unpredictable dynamics that had defined the past several years. And deep down, she feared the arrival of Harry might push the carefully curated evening into chaos. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency, but behind their disciplined routines, anxiety simmered. Every footstep, every adjustment, every whispered instruction was executed with an awareness that the balance of the evening was precarious. The palace had been home to centuries of royal tradition, and yet in that moment, it felt as if all the careful choreography of history could unravel in an instant. As the clock neared the hour of the celebration, William paused for a moment in the grand hallway. He looked at the decorations, the flickering candlelight, the prepared tables, and felt the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders. Every choice he had made was a reflection of his responsibility, not just as a host, but as a brother, as a future king, and as a custodian of family legacy. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this Christmas would not unfold according to plan. And then it happened. A shadow appeared at the end of the corridor. A figure, familiar yet unexpected, made their way toward the grand hall. Staff froze mid-step. Children paused in their games. Kate caught her breath, and William, sensing the disruption immediately, felt a surge of adrenaline. It was a moment that had been building for years, a collision of past grievances, present tensions, and future consequences. What followed would test every relationship, challenge every expectation, and redefine what it meant to be part of a family in the public eye. The calm that had cloaked the palace for hours evaporated in an instant, replaced by a charged silence that spoke louder than any words. And as that figure stepped closer, the room held its breath, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the door creaked open, the air in the grand hall seemed to shift. It was subtle at first. A barely perceptible ripple, a hush that fell over the room, but anyone with even a fraction of awareness would have noticed it immediately. Harry stood there, casually adjusting the cuff of his sleeve, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He carried no invitation, no official welcome, and yet he moved forward as if the palace itself had opened a path for him. And in that instant, everything changed. William's eyes locked on his younger brother, a mix of disbelief, irritation, and something deeper, more primal, betrayal. It was not simply that Harry had arrived uninvited. It was that he had ignored boundaries that William had worked for months to reinforce. Every decoration, every table setting, every meticulously planned moment now felt fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter it all. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, sensing the tension that had silently been building over years. Kate, standing slightly behind William, felt a flutter of concern. She had anticipated challenges, yes, but this was different. There was no warning, no subtle approach, no polite note of intention. Harry's arrival was audacious, almost theatrical, and it immediately placed everyone in a state of alert. The staff froze mid-step, trays of hors d'oeuvres trembling slightly in their hands. Some whispered quietly, eyes darting between the brothers, while others pretended not to notice, hoping that discretion would be enough to prevent an escalation. "Harry," William said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of authority. There was a pause, a pregnant moment where the younger prince's eyes met his brother's, and then the first real crack in the polished veneer of the evening appeared. Harry's smile faltered just slightly, a micro-expression caught in the corner of his mouth, and yet he stepped forward anyway, exuding a confidence that was both infuriating and disarming. The staff had learned to read tension in the palace long before the public ever saw it. They knew when a family disagreement could be contained and when it might erupt into something much larger. Tonight, they could feel it in the way Harry moved, deliberately, almost challengingly, toward the center of the room. Every footstep was deliberate, every glance calculated. And William, sensing the challenge, braced himself. Why had Harry done this? Was it curiosity, rebellion, or a desire to reclaim something he felt had been taken from him? The answer was likely a mixture of all three, but it also spoke to a deeper dynamic. A fracture in their relationship that had grown with each public slight, each perceived betrayal, and each carefully managed media appearance. Harry's decision to attend without invitation was not impulsive, it was deliberate, and that made it all the more threatening. Guests, quietly arriving from other parts of the estate, began to notice the subtle tension. The room, so carefully arranged to embody warmth and festive cheer, now seemed charged with anticipation. Even the children paused in their games, sensing the change in energy, their laughter fading into the background. Every person in that hall knew, instinctively, that something monumental was about to occur. As Harry advanced, William's posture stiffened. He had been trained for moments like this. Decades of protocol, preparation, and observation had honed his instincts. But this was personal, more personal than any ceremonial confrontation. This was his brother, the sibling with whom he had shared toys, jokes, and childhood mischief, now standing in opposition to the order William had worked tirelessly to maintain. The unspoken rules of royalty were clear: family, respect, and tradition above all else. And yet, Harry had blatantly disregarded them. Kate stepped subtly closer to William, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture meant to anchor him, to remind him that control did not always require confrontation. She knew, as he did, that the optics of the moment were critical. One wrong expression, one poorly chosen word, and the scene could be broadcast across every channel in the world. But there was no time for hesitation. Harry had made his move, and William had to respond. The silence was broken only by the soft rustle of garments and the faint crackle of the fireplace. Harry's gaze swept across the room, noting the frozen staff, the tense expressions, the way Kate subtly positioned herself between him and the table. There was a calculated bravado in his demeanor, a mix of defiance and charm that had always been his hallmark. Yet even he could sense that this evening was different, that his presence alone had shifted the balance of power in the room. "William," Harry said, his tone casual, almost conversational, yet carrying an undercurrent of challenge. "I thought I'd join the celebration. I didn't realize an invitation was required." The words, seemingly innocuous, were loaded with implication. It was not merely a question, it was a test, a subtle probe of his brother's tolerance and authority. William, maintaining a composed exterior, took a measured step forward. The muscles in his jaw tightened slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to convey both his awareness and his disapproval. This was not about courtesy, it was about principle. Every action in that room now held significance, and William knew that how he handled this moment would resonate far beyond the palace walls. Staffers exchanged glances. They had seen disputes before, but rarely had the tension been so visible, so palpable. Some tried to continue their tasks, carrying trays and adjusting settings, but their movements were stiff, hesitant, almost ritualistic. The entire hall seemed suspended in time, each breath and glance magnified, as though the room itself recognized the gravity of what was unfolding. Kate, ever the diplomat, intervened subtly, offering Harry a small, courteous smile. "We're glad you could make it," she said, her voice light, yet firm, an effort to maintain equilibrium without undermining William's authority. But even she knew the gesture was fragile, a veneer that could crack at any moment. The conversation, brief though it was, set the stage for what was to come. Words had been exchanged, boundaries implicitly tested, and every participant in the room felt the tension mounting. This was no longer a mere family gathering. It had become a high-stakes confrontation, with history, reputation, and personal pride hanging in the balance. As Harry moved further into the hall, the space between the brothers felt electric. Every person in the room sensed the potential for escalation, the thin line separating decorum from disaster. The moment demanded a response, a decisive action that would define the trajectory of the evening. And William, fully aware of the implications, prepared to act. But before he could speak, before anyone could intervene, Harry paused. His eyes met William's once more, a silent challenge passing between them. The air was thick with anticipation, and for an instant, the world seemed to hold its breath. Every instinct, every memory, every ounce of preparation converged in that single heartbeat. And then, with a controlled yet unmistakable authority, William took action. A choice that would shock everyone present and set off a chain of events no one had anticipated. The room was silent, but the silence was heavy, loaded with anticipation and an unspoken understanding that something was about to break. Harry had crossed the threshold uninvited, and every polished detail of the palace, every carefully curated arrangement, seemed to vibrate with tension. William, standing tall and composed, felt the weight of the moment settle squarely on his shoulders. This wasn't just about a brother showing up unexpectedly. This was about authority, family loyalty, and the fragile balance of tradition being tested in real time. The first words came from William, low and measured, but carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to command. "Harry, this was not expected," he said. The words themselves were simple, yet each syllable carried the gravity of centuries of royal protocol. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a dramatic gesture. He didn't need to. The room, staff, and family members all understood the power in his tone. Harry, for his part, did not flinch. There was a faint smirk on his face, a combination of defiance and amusement that had long been a hallmark of his public persona. "I didn't think an invitation was necessary," he replied casually, almost teasingly, though the undertone was sharp, calculated. It wasn't mere banter, it was a challenge. And in that challenge, William recognized the spark of a deeper tension, one that had been simmering for years. Kate, standing slightly to the side, interjected softly, her voice measured and diplomatic. "We're glad you're here, Harry. Let's enjoy the evening." But even she could feel the brittle edge in the air. Her words were meant to soothe, to bridge the widening gap, yet they barely scratched the surface of the underlying storm. The staff moved around them cautiously, hands frozen mid-task, aware that any misstep could escalate the situation. The initial exchange, brief as it was, set the tone for the confrontation. William's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle signal that his patience had limits. He had spent years balancing public expectations with personal relationships, and he knew that failing to assert authority now could undermine his role, both as a leader within the family and as the future monarch. Harry, sensing the tension, shifted his weight, leaning slightly forward as if to claim space. His body language was deliberate, relaxed, confident, almost challenging in its ease. Yet beneath the bravado, there was a tension that mirrored his brother's own. He knew the optics, understood the stakes, and yet chose to push the boundary. Every subtle movement, every glance, was a part of an unspoken negotiation. An invisible chess game played out under the eyes of those who had long witnessed the subtleties of royal power. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Some whispered quietly among themselves, noting the subtle cues, the tightening of William's jaw, the slight raise of Harry's eyebrow, the faint tilt of Kate's head. Every micro-expression was loaded with meaning. To the untrained observer, it might seem like a polite disagreement. To those who understood palace dynamics, it was a signal flare, a warning that the evening could erupt into something far more dramatic. And then William made the first decisive move. His voice remained calm, but there was an edge now, a firmness that left no room for misinterpretation. "Harry, I need you to step back. You weren't invited, and this is a private family event. It's not appropriate for you to just appear unannounced." The words were polite, formal even, but the authority behind them was unmistakable. Harry's smirk faltered, just slightly, replaced by a flash of something harder to read. Defiance, perhaps, or frustration. "I came to be with my family," he said, his tone steady but carrying a subtle challenge. "I thought that mattered more than protocol." It was a statement meant to probe, to test limits, and to highlight a tension that had long gone unspoken. The conflict between personal connection and royal duty. For a moment, neither brother spoke. The room held its breath. Kate moved subtly, placing herself between them in a gesture meant to de-escalate. "Let's not make this uncomfortable," she said gently, though her eyes betrayed concern. Even the children sensed the gravity of the moment, their playful chatter fading into the background as they watched adults navigate a delicate, high-stakes conflict. But the confrontation had only begun. William's next words, measured and deliberate, conveyed a finality that left no room for negotiation. "Harry, I'm asking you, for the sake of everyone here, to respect the arrangements we've made. You cannot just impose yourself. This is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of family and tradition." The subtle rigidity of his posture, the firm set of his jaw, the unwavering eye contact, all spoke volumes. It was clear, William was asserting control, not out of malice, but out of necessity. He understood the stakes. Allowing Harry to overstep boundaries could undermine his authority, disrupt the delicate balance of family decorum, and invite media scrutiny that would reach every corner of the globe. Harry, sensing the weight of the moment, paused. For the first time, the casual ease he had relied upon seemed to waver. The staff, watching closely, noticed the subtle shift. His shoulders straightened, his hands fell to his sides, and his gaze briefly flicked toward Kate, seeking some measure of mediation or approval. But Kate, for all her diplomacy, maintained a neutral stance, unwilling to intervene too heavily and risk favoring one brother over the other. The room was tense, each heartbeat amplified by the gravity of the situation. Every staff member, every family member, and every observer could sense that the next few moments would define the evening, and potentially the relationship between the two brothers for years to come. Finally, William took a step forward, closing a fraction of the space between them. His voice, calm yet resolute, carried a message that left no room for misinterpretation. "Harry, you have to leave. This is not negotiable." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Staffers froze mid-motion. The children's wide eyes reflected confusion and fear, and even the palace walls seemed to hum with the gravity of the confrontation. Harry, momentarily taken aback, blinked, as if the severity of the command had only just registered. And then, in a gesture that would later be dissected endlessly in media coverage, he paused, weighing his next move. This was the defining moment. The air was charged with a potent mixture of family loyalty, personal pride, and the inescapable weight of public expectation. In that heartbeat, every unspoken grievance, every past dispute, every moment of resentment converged. The confrontation was no longer hypothetical. It was real, immediate, and unavoidable. And then Harry made a move, a gesture, a response that would shock the staff, the family, and ultimately the world. It was a response that demonstrated both his defiance and his vulnerability, a mixture of emotions that left everyone uncertain how the evening would continue. In the hours and days following the Christmas 2025 confrontation, the palace staff became an unlikely source of insight into the drama that unfolded behind the gilded doors. These were the people who had been there from the beginning. The housekeepers who arranged the tables, the butlers who guided each guest, the chefs who ensured the feast went off without a hitch, and the aides who moved silently through corridors, observing and recording in memory what the world outside could never see. For them, the night had been a mixture of awe, tension, and fear. And now, for the first time, some were finally speaking, albeit cautiously, about what really happened when Harry arrived uninvited and William made his fateful decision. One senior aide, speaking under condition of anonymity, described the initial moment when Harry stepped into the hall. "It was like someone had turned off the lights," they said. Everyone froze. You could feel it in your chest, like a physical weight pressing down. The room went from a calm, festive atmosphere to something completely different. William's eyes, he didn't even have to speak at first. You could see the message. This isn't happening. Other staff members corroborated the sense of immediate tension. "We've seen disagreements before, but never anything like this," said a long-serving housekeeper. It wasn't loud. There was no shouting. But the way they looked at each other, you could cut the air with a knife. Everyone in the room knew something significant was about to happen. The staff's perspective is vital because it reveals the human element that often gets lost in media coverage. To the public, these events are framed as scandalous headlines or social media speculation. But those who live within the walls of the palace experience them differently. They see the minute shifts in posture, the micro-expressions that hint at underlying emotions, and the subtle exchanges that could either de-escalate or ignite a situation. And on that Christmas, the palace staff watched as a carefully maintained balance teetered on the edge of collapse. One of the most startling revelations from staff accounts was the sense of anticipation that permeated the air before the confrontation even escalated. They noted Harry's casual approach, the deliberate confidence in his movements, and the way he engaged with staff members as if to test the boundaries. Some aides admitted feeling a mix of admiration and fear. "He walked in like he owned the place," one remarked. But you knew the moment he and William locked eyes, everything was going to change. The staff also shed light on Kate's role during these tense moments. She moved gracefully through the hall, providing subtle interventions to prevent a complete collapse of decorum. "Kate was remarkable," an insider said. She positioned herself in ways that were non-confrontational but protective. You could tell she was trying to maintain calm without taking sides. It's a difficult line to walk when your husband is about to confront his brother in front of the whole household. As the confrontation continued, staff members observed the layers of emotion in real time. William's authority was clear, but it was not exercised carelessly. His commands were precise, his posture unwavering. Yet there was a visible strain in his expression, a reminder that this was not just a professional test, but a deeply personal one. Harry, in turn, displayed a combination of defiance, charm, and tension. He challenged boundaries, yes, but there was also an undercurrent of vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement of the stakes involved. Some staffers revealed moments that were nearly surreal. One recounted the eerie quiet just before William ordered Harry to leave. You could hear the clock ticking, they said. Even the children seemed to sense something important was happening. The entire palace became a stage, and the two brothers were at the center of it. Another noted the subtle ways in which aides tried to manage the room, stepping in to guide staff, offering gentle distractions, and keeping the children occupied while the adults negotiated the high-stakes conflict. Beyond the immediate tension, staff members also spoke about the aftermath within the palace itself. After Harry left, said a long-serving butler, there was a collective exhale, but it wasn't relief. It was shock, disbelief, and an awareness that nothing would ever be quite the same. Everyone knew the headlines were coming, and we all felt the weight of history in that moment. Others described a lingering unease, a sense that the balance of power, the dynamics of the family, and the carefully curated image of unity had been permanently altered. Interestingly, staff accounts also hinted at some of the behind-the-scenes negotiations that occurred during the confrontation. Some aides attempted subtle mediation, whispering to each brother at different moments, reminding them of decorum and protocol. Others quietly observed, allowing the brothers to navigate the tension themselves, knowing that interference could escalate the situation further. This delicate dance highlighted the complexity of palace life. Every action, every word, carried layers of consequence, and even the most experienced staff were constantly assessing risk. Another remarkable detail staff shared was the unspoken communication between family members. The aides noted fleeting gestures, a touch on an arm, a subtle nod, a glance that conveyed reassurance, warning, or solidarity. These small moments, invisible to the casual observer, were instrumental in managing the high-tension environment. For those who had spent years in service to the royal family, these cues were second nature, but in this instance, they underscored the extraordinary pressure of the evening. Some staffers were candid about the emotional toll. "We're trained to handle emergencies, conflicts, and high-pressure events," said one. But this was different. It was personal. You could feel the raw emotion. Everyone knew the history, the grievances, and the stakes. It wasn't just a fight over etiquette. It was a clash of identity, family loyalty, and authority. Others agreed, describing the scene as both heartbreaking and mesmerizing, a real-life drama that unfolded in a space usually reserved for tradition and ceremony. The staff accounts also highlighted the role of media anticipation. Even within the palace, there was an acute awareness that every moment of tension could be captured, leaked, or misinterpreted. Staffers described the mental balancing act, maintaining discretion while witnessing events that would inevitably dominate headlines and social media feeds. This awareness added an additional layer of stress to an already volatile evening. And yet, through all the chaos, the staff observed one central truth. William's response was decisive, deliberate, and calculated. Every step he took, every word he uttered, was measured to assert control while minimizing public fallout. Harry's presence had disrupted the calm, challenged authority, and exposed underlying tensions, but the brothers' ability to navigate or struggle through the confrontation would define the evening, the holiday, and public perception for years to come. But even as staff shared their accounts, one detail lingered in whispers and hushed conversations. Something had happened off camera, a moment invisible to most, that would later redefine how the public understood the confrontation. A gesture, a word, a decision, so subtle, yet so pivotal, that its significance would only become clear after the media storm hit. What exactly happened in that private, unrecorded moment? How did the staff interpret it, and what were the implications for the family dynamic? These questions remain critical because they set the stage for the next phase of the evening. The moment when the confrontation would escalate beyond polite requests and subtle defiance, reaching a level of intensity that would shock everyone present. While the room held its tension, another presence was quietly influencing the unfolding drama: Meghan Markle. Often absent from the immediate spotlight, she moved through the edges of the palace with a calculated subtlety, aware of the stakes and the optics of every gesture. Insiders now reveal that her influence on Harry's uninvited appearance and the way he navigated the confrontation was far more significant than the public could have imagined. Meghan's approach was strategic from the outset. Rather than appearing in the hall immediately, she lingered in quieter spaces, observing the staff, gauging the mood, and offering whispered advice. Sources indicate that she had long prepared Harry for moments like this, emphasizing the importance of assertiveness without losing public favor. This was a delicate balance. She wanted him to be present, to assert agency, but not to be seen as disruptive in a way that could undermine their public image. One aide described her demeanor that evening as almost surgical in precision. She wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, but every movement, every word she offered to Harry was measured. She knew exactly when to advise, when to step back, and when to let him act. You could see it in his posture. There was confidence there that wasn't just natural. It was cultivated. Meghan's role highlights a recurring theme in this family saga: the tension between private motives and public appearances. While William's authority and the palace's traditional structure demanded adherence to protocol, Meghan's guidance emphasized personal agency, self-expression, and challenging the norms when necessary. This dichotomy intensified the evening's stakes. William was asserting centuries of inherited responsibility, while Harry, bolstered by Meghan's counsel, was testing boundaries. Sources claim that Meghan even helped craft subtle verbal and nonverbal cues that Harry used during the confrontation. From the tilt of his head to the inflection in his voice, her advice reportedly helped him navigate the delicate interplay between defiance and decorum. "She's brilliant at understanding optics," one insider said. "Even in high-pressure situations, she knows how to frame actions so they're powerful without appearing reckless." That night, every subtle move Harry made was informed by her insight. Her influence extended beyond Harry alone. Staff noticed Meghan interacting with aides quietly, ensuring that potential flashpoints could be managed without escalation. She instructed certain staffers to position themselves subtly in ways that prevented interruptions, guided others to maintain composure, and even reminded the children to stay calm and not interfere. Her presence was like an invisible hand, steering the unfolding tension while maintaining a veneer of discretion. The interplay between Meghan's guidance and the brothers' confrontation created a palpable undercurrent in the hall. William, focused entirely on protocol and the unexpected intrusion, was unaware of the coaching Harry had received. This made his brother's poise and subtle defiance all the more challenging to address. Staff members reported being struck by Harry's controlled confidence. He appeared calm, composed, and respectful, yet unmistakably assertive. Observers noted that it wasn't arrogance, it was deliberate, informed action. Interestingly, Meghan's influence also added layers of emotional complexity. On one hand, she encouraged Harry to stand his ground, to assert his personal autonomy. On the other, she subtly reminded him to read the room, to respect the environment, and to avoid actions that would escalate into public scandal. It was a careful balance, and it added a psychological dimension to the confrontation that insiders say was crucial in preventing a full-blown crisis at that very moment. Several staff members reported brief interactions between Meghan and Kate during the event. These encounters, while polite on the surface, carried an undercurrent of tension. They nodded at each other, exchanged small gestures, but there was a charged energy, an aide recalled. Both women were aware of the stakes, both trying to maintain peace in their own ways, and yet their approaches were subtly at odds. It was fascinating to watch. Meghan's presence also had a noticeable effect on William. While he remained outwardly composed, Aides noted micro-expressions of awareness, subtle glances, tightened jawlines, and brief pauses that suggested he sensed an additional layer of influence behind Harry's actions. This awareness likely heightened William's vigilance, forcing him to respond with even greater precision and care. What's particularly striking, according to multiple insiders, is that Meghan's strategy seemed to anticipate potential public narratives. Every move, every suggestion she made, was designed not only to protect Harry in the immediate moment, but to ensure that any subsequent media coverage could be framed in their favor. This was an example of the modern royal dynamic. Private guidance with a keen understanding of public perception. Despite her careful management, Meghan was not immune to the evening's emotional intensity. Staff described moments when her composure faltered briefly. Quick, private expressions of worry or tension before she regained her characteristic poise. These glimpses, fleeting as they were, highlighted the human cost of orchestrating influence behind the scenes. The emotional burden was immense. Guiding a high-profile family confrontation while navigating centuries of tradition, staff dynamics, and public scrutiny. By the time the confrontation reached its apex, Meghan's influence had become a critical factor in the unfolding drama. Harry's measured responses, his subtle gestures of defiance, and his ability to maintain composure under the weight of his brother's authority were, according to insiders, significantly informed by her counsel. Without it, the evening might have escalated far more rapidly into chaos. But Meghan's role wasn't merely about strategy. It was about stakes that went beyond the evening itself. She understood that the 2025 Christmas confrontation would leave an enduring mark on the royal family dynamic. Every choice, every reaction, every subtle action could ripple outward, shaping not only family relationships but public perception and media narratives for years. Her guidance ensured that Harry's presence was impactful yet contained, assertive yet not reckless, a careful navigation of power, perception, and familial loyalty. Yet, even with her influence, the tension in the hall remained unbearable. Every observer, from the staff to the family members, could sense that the situation was approaching a critical threshold. The invisible threads of strategy, authority, defiance, and guidance converged in that space, creating a volatile mix. Every second felt stretched, every glance amplified, and every word charged with potential consequences. And then, in a moment that staff later described as electric, William made a decision, a move that was both immediate and irrevocable. The culmination of preparation, authority, and years of latent tension came to a head. Harry, guided subtly by Meghan, stood poised, ready for the response. And the world inside the palace paused, waiting for what would happen next. Even before the confrontation in the Grand Hall reached its climax, the media was already alive with speculation. In the modern royal ecosystem, a single misstep, or even a hint of tension, can spark a worldwide frenzy. Journalists, social media analysts, and fans alike were primed for any sign of drama, reading into every glance, every gesture, every carefully worded statement. And in the case of Christmas 2025, the stage was set for a storm that would erupt faster than anyone could anticipate. Long before Harry had crossed the threshold of the palace, whispers of potential conflict had been circulating in private news circles. Royal correspondents, often privy to subtle leaks and insider tips, were already anticipating that a confrontation might occur. Sources, who preferred anonymity, confirmed that a heightened state of alert had gripped the palace press corps. Everyone knew, this year, Christmas wouldn't just be festive, it would be a flashpoint. On social media, speculation ran rampant. Fans debated whether Harry would attend, whether William would allow it, and how Kate and Meghan might react. Every theory, rumor, and hypothetical scenario gained traction, amplifying public curiosity. By the time Harry actually appeared in the hall, the world's collective gaze had already been fixed upon the family. The result was a pre-ignition of scrutiny. The media storm was not just reacting, it was anticipating. Inside the palace, aides were acutely aware of this external pressure. Every move Harry and William made was being monitored, not just by those present, but by an invisible audience numbering in the millions. Staff later admitted that even a seemingly minor gesture, Harry adjusting a cuff, William pausing before speaking, was enough to trigger internal debates about optics. You could feel the tension, knowing that any small action could be amplified 1,000 times online, one aide recalled. It wasn't just family, it was history in the making, and the world was watching even before a single photo was released. Media insiders also noted a unique aspect of the 2025 Christmas, the preemptive framing of the story. Press outlets had already prepared for potential fallout, with storylines and narratives queued and ready to publish. Headlines were drafted anticipating conflict, royal tension at Christmas, Harry challenges protocol, family feud threatens holiday celebration. In other words, the narrative machinery was primed. The drama was already halfway into the public sphere before the first word of the confrontation had been spoken. This preemptive scrutiny added a layer of complexity to the evening. William, trained for decades in managing public perception, was acutely aware that any misstep could dominate global headlines. His composure wasn't merely a personal skill. It was a calculated effort to maintain control in a situation that had already begun to leak beyond palace walls, even without formal reporting. The palace's internal communications were a whirlwind of strategy. Senior aides coordinated closely with press officers, preparing for multiple outcomes. Every potential statement, every possible scenario, was analyzed for how it might be received by the public. Staff were reminded to remain discreet, aware that a casual comment could inadvertently fuel speculation. Yet, despite all these measures, no one could fully anticipate the raw human drama unfolding in real time within the Grand Hall. Insiders reveal that part of the tension stemmed from the knowledge that once Harry appeared, the confrontation would be inevitable, and the media would capture every subtle move, no matter how discreet. Even without cameras, even without microphones, you could sense that the world was watching, one aide said. It was like performing in front of a global audience without ever leaving the room. Interestingly, the anticipation also shaped behavior among the family. William was aware that Harry's actions, guided by Meghan, were informed not only by personal intent but by the likely interpretation of public audiences. Every gesture, every word, was weighted with the knowledge that millions of eyes, and countless analyses, were ready to scrutinize them. This knowledge intensified his resolve, forcing him to respond with precision and authority. Kate, too, felt the pressure. Staff later noted her subtle interventions to manage both family dynamics and public perception. She ensured that children were kept calm, positioned herself strategically to prevent escalation, and maintained a poised demeanor for the cameras that were often nearby. Even in private spaces, she seemed acutely aware that the boundaries between private and public were nearly non-existent. Social media algorithms, already primed by leaks and speculation, reacted instantly. By the time the first informal accounts of tension reached the outside world, hashtags were trending and speculation spread like wildfire. Memes, commentary, and fan theories multiplied rapidly, amplifying curiosity and public engagement. For staff and family alike, this external pressure created an additional layer of tension, as every action inside the palace could ripple instantly into a worldwide audience. The irony, insiders say, was palpable. The family had meticulously planned a traditional Christmas, yet the very tradition, its public visibility, its ceremonial structure, made the evening ripe for global scrutiny. Even a perfectly orchestrated event could be reframed in minutes by public interpretation, social media, and the relentless appetite for drama surrounding the royals. For the first time that evening, staff began to consider a critical question. Could the confrontation be contained, or was the media storm already unstoppable? The tension in the room was mirrored by the tension outside, where speculation and anticipation had already begun to shape public perception. The palace was no longer merely a backdrop for private family interactions. It had become a stage on which global narratives were being written in real time. And yet, despite the omnipresent media gaze, the brothers' confrontation remained intensely personal. The world outside could speculate endlessly, but the raw emotion, history, and stakes inside the hall were far more complex. Every subtle movement, glance, and word carried significance that no headline could fully capture. The staff later recalled the sense of being in the middle of history, a moment both private and public, deeply human yet under relentless scrutiny. Even with the media storm poised to erupt, William's decision remained decisive. He understood that perception mattered, yes, but so did principle. Authority, family tradition, and the integrity of the evening demanded action. And in that charged moment, with the global eye already anticipating every possible drama, William took a step that would ensure the confrontation, and the Christmas of 2025 would be remembered forever. As the tension between the two brothers reached its peak, the reactions of other family members became critical and, in many ways, telling. In a royal family, every expression, every movement, every slight gesture carries meaning. The uninvited arrival of Harry was no longer just a private conflict. It had become a litmus test for loyalty, diplomacy, and composure among those who stood closest to him and William. Kate Middleton, ever poised and aware of the delicate balance she needed to maintain, acted quickly. Her first priority was to contain the immediate tension in front of the staff and children. Sources reveal she subtly placed herself near the brothers, her body language calm but firm, signaling a gentle barrier between confrontation and escalation. Her role was extraordinary. She had to assert a presence without taking sides, demonstrating solidarity with William while offering the invisible support that Harry had long depended upon Meghan to provide. The children, though young, were acutely aware of the charged atmosphere. Staff recount that even in the midst of games and laughter, they paused, sensing the unusual stiffness in the adults' movements. One aide noted that their innocent confusion only heightened the emotional weight of the room. A child's wide-eyed stare, a hesitant step, a whispered question. These small, human moments amplified the tension and reminded everyone of the stakes involved. Other senior family members watched with a mix of concern and calculation. Older relatives, familiar with the intricacies of palace life, quickly assessed the unfolding drama, weighing whether to intervene, remain neutral, or offer support. Each choice carried potential consequences. Intervening too soon could escalate the confrontation or appear as taking sides, while remaining silent risked complicity in what some might perceive as unfair treatment. Even the extended family felt the strain. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and even occasional guests who had been invited for the festivities were keenly aware of the invisible pressure building between William and Harry. The slightest flinch or shift in expression was magnified, and staff later described whispered conversations among them, all trying to interpret the unspoken communication between the two brothers. Meghan's presence, though mostly behind the scenes, was also influencing reactions. Her subtle guidance to Harry had the effect of stabilizing him emotionally while still allowing him to assert himself. This, in turn, created a ripple effect. Family members could sense that Harry was not reacting impulsively, that his defiance was deliberate, informed, and controlled. It forced William to respond with even greater precision, as any overt display of frustration risked being misread or sensationalized. The grandchildren, present in small groups around the hall, were kept occupied with small activities, but their reactions did not go unnoticed. Staff later revealed that the children's nervous glances and sudden silences added an emotional weight that made the confrontation feel even more intense. In family dynamics, the presence of children often amplifies tension. Adults must carefully navigate authority, discipline, and composure, knowing that the youngest members are silently absorbing every nuance. Several aides also described moments of quiet communication between Kate and Meghan. Though their interactions were polite and seemingly neutral, there was a palpable undercurrent of tension and negotiation. Both women were trying to manage the evening in ways consistent with their roles, yet their approaches were subtly different. Kate emphasizing containment and decorum, Meghan emphasizing confidence and personal agency. The result was a complex ballet of influence, shaping not only the brothers' behavior but the reactions of the entire household. Even William's parents and older relatives, aware of the delicate choreography unfolding, watched carefully. They had seen similar tensions in the past, though perhaps never this directly. Some whispered quietly to aides, offering advice or suggesting discreet interventions. Others simply observed, allowing the brothers to navigate the confrontation themselves, understanding that interference could either defuse or inflame the situation. Staff accounts also highlight the emotional toll on family members. The combination of history, personal loyalty, and the global spotlight created a pressure cooker environment. Even subtle gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a soft sigh, a glance exchanged across the room, were interpreted with weight and significance. Each family member had to balance personal feelings with public perception, a challenge that required constant vigilance and restraint. Interestingly, the presence of Meghan seemed to elicit a mixture of respect, wariness, and subtle tension among the family. Her influence on Harry, combined with the visible strategic choices he made, underscored the stakes for every family member in the room. They were watching not only the direct confrontation, but also the ripple effects of Meghan's guidance, trying to assess its implications for family dynamics, public perception, and the broader narrative that would inevitably emerge. The staff also described a pivotal moment when one of the younger royals attempted to intervene, a small gesture meant to diffuse tension. William's measured response immediately reminded everyone that authority rested with him in this context. It was subtle, yet incredibly powerful, a demonstration of leadership without aggression, reinforcing the hierarchical and traditional structure of the family while managing the emotional intensity in the room. As the confrontation continued, the reactions of the family were increasingly telling. Some members displayed quiet empathy toward Harry, recognizing the personal stakes involved. Others leaned more visibly toward William, respecting his authority and the careful balance he was trying to maintain. These split loyalties, while subtle, created an undercurrent of tension that only heightened the stakes of every word and gesture. By the time the confrontation neared its climax, every member of the household, staff, family, and children alike, was acutely aware that history was unfolding. The mixture of shock, concern, subtle alliances, and emotional awareness created